Good morning. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to Venture Atlanta 2009. My name is Ashish Mistry. I'm president of the Atlanta CEO Council, one of the founding organizers of Venture Atlanta. For those not familiar with the Atlanta CEO Council, we're an executive networking organization exclusively for C-level executives. For over 10 years, we've focused on events that build relationships through peer networking at the executive level, events that promote entrepreneurship, and events that invest in our community. I invite you to learn more about the Atlanta CEO Council and join us. Our membership's complimentary for qualified executives. You can learn more about that at our table outside or through our executive director, Harriet Hollis. So a little history on Venture Atlanta. In 2002, the Atlanta CEO Council identified a need in our community to connect venture capitalists with our emerging growth companies. That said, we launched ION. Basically, this conference was designed to showcase local companies and pair them with venture capitalists coming in from out of town. Over our 6-year stint, we raised $451 million for the companies that presented and over $700 million in acquisitions and public offerings directly attributed to the participation by companies in ION. By 2008, the success of ION had outgrown one organization, and thus we teamed up with the Technology Association of Georgia and the Metro Atlanta Chamber to bring you what is now known as Venture Atlanta. Last year's success was huge, and by any measure, with more than 500 attendees and 21 presenting companies, we launched Venture Atlanta and had a great start. And this year's attendance is much better, and by 25%, so to say. And we can see that with the companies presenting today, I think you'll find that we've got another great conference in store for you today. That said, none of this would be possible without our sponsors, some of which have been with us for almost a decade. It's a lot to say, and one of those sponsors is going to be introducing our keynote speaker, and I'd like to bring up David Calhoun from Morris, Manning & Martin. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks to everybody for coming out on what looked like a pretty wet Wednesday. We've got a great conference ahead, and we at Morris Manning Martin are very pleased with the turnout, and we are excited to be the premier sponsor of the event. As many of you probably know, we're an Atlanta-based firm with a focus on representing technology and technology-enabled companies at all stages of a corporate life cycle. And again, a proud sponsor of Venture Atlanta. I'd like to thank the board for putting on such a great event, and Allison for doing a great job. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Pete Kight, our keynote speaker this morning. Pete is currently the vice chairman of Fiserv and is considered a pioneer in the financial services technology industry, specifically in electronic funds transfer, online banking, electronic billing, and payment and managed benefits. Pete was the founder and chairman and chief executive officer of Checkfree, who we all know, until it was acquired by Fiserv in December of 2007. At that time, he became vice chairman of Fiserv and still sits on the board of directors of the company. He founded Checkfree in 1981 in his grandmother's basement with the vision of providing electronic funds transfer services to businesses and consumers. His first key hire, interestingly, was our own Mark Johnson, who is the chairman of Venture Atlanta this year, so there's a good connection there. Checkfree's vision over 26 years that it's operated was expand to build infrastructure to support new services that enable and uncomplicate the electronic movement and management of personal and business finances. Today, the products are pervasive. If you do online banking, chances are very high that you're using a check-free product. As the number one technology provider on American Banker's FinTech list, Fiserv's purview extends to managing multiple types of payments and processing infrastructures, leveraging business intelligence to manage risk, and helping banks and credit unions reach customers throughout multiple channels from the branch to the iPhone. The company remains the leader in online banking and is now extending the ability for banks and credit unions to reach customers via mobile devices all the way from Brookhaven to Bangkok. Pete was recognized as one of the 10 unsung financial heroes in Money Magazine, and he's been featured in Fortune Magazine, where Checkfree's e-payments functionality was named one of the 7 silver bullet technologies. In 2007, he received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor and was the first recipient of the Peter J. Kight Lifetime Achievement Award from Bank Technology News. Pete is a member of the board of directors of Akamai Technologies, Manhattan Associates here in Atlanta, and the USA Track and Field Foundation. Again, it's my pleasure to introduce Pete.
So I thought what I would do is just sort of break this up into 3 sort of brief sections. So one, just to give you a little bit of overview on where Checkfree came from, just so you'll know where my perspective has actually been developed. I'd like to talk a little bit about, this being venture capital audience. I'd like to talk a little bit about how I view the opportunity that is ahead of all of us who invest in the technology and venture capital area going forward, just to make sure I get a chance to actually talk about what I think is, you're going to see this is definitely comes from a bit of a financial services perspective, because that is my background, although I'm actually active as a managing partner in a private equity firm, and I care as much as many of you do about where are we investing next. I spent a lot of time looking at both the financial services side and what we've learned there in regard to where I think the opportunities are going forward. And then, this being a venture capital conference, I never want to miss the chance to always sort of close with providing a few of the points that, looking back over the years, just a couple of the points that the venture capitalists, that I learned over time, the venture capitalists didn't tell me that I had to learn on my own. Because you get a chance to slip one at the VCs now and then, you never want to miss that opportunity. So this is just background on Fiserv. You already heard a bit about it. We are an infrastructure company. We're not as well known. In fact, I didn't realize that Fiserv wasn't as well known to the extent that it is not until after we made the merger. And I would explain to people that Checkfree had just sold to Fiserv, and they would look at me and say, why would a pharmaceutical company want to be in the technology business? And honestly, I have never come up with a good solution to that. No matter how slow I say it, they still think I'm saying Pfizer. So it is a sizable organization. The fact is, when you put Fiserv and Checkfree together, one of the components that really drove that, one of the things that I felt was the most important in this overall value proposition, besides the breadth of distribution that the combination represents, there was the minor factor that 3 years ago I thought I saw the beginning of what was going to become a significant problem for the U.S. banking industry. And so that was really the primary driver. I will have to tell you, I wasn't nearly smart enough to figure out how deep it really went, but I was fortunate enough to sort of read the information coming my way and realize that what I thought was going to be a 3-year cyclical downturn in the banking industry, turns out I underestimated that, but at least I got the general direction right. But given that, one of the things that really drove us to put Fiserv and Checkfree together is the fact, as you will hear about in a second, the fact that I believe data and the information and knowledge that is contained within the data is going to be the future of what today people think of as technology, platform, transaction, and processing services. Putting these two companies together, I can tell you one of the ways that I describe what this combination means is that Fiserv and Checkfree combined own more relational financial information about more individual households than any other third party in the world. That fact to me is much more important than any of the normal facts that you would read in an analyst report. Just a little bit of background on Checkfree. This is sort of the history. In terms of sort of educational information, how we got there, what we did, how we did it, I'm going to let Mark answer those questions anytime you want to corner him. Trust me, by the second glass of wine, he'll tell you the things I won't tell you. I thought just, though, for interest's sake, as I was just going over, writing down this chronology, and I noted the raised $3 million from local insurance firms. I would have to tell you, when we first started Checkfree, we proved its case. We went out, we created a significant amount of revenue. We proved we could get to break even. We proved that you could, in fact, get consumers, way back in the early 80s to give up their check for at least a few of those payments. They were willing to engage in electronic funds transfer, which the banking industry didn't think that they were. We've proven all that. We went out to raise money, and I still remember the number. We met with 36 venture capital firms, and we got turned down by 36 venture capital firms. At the end of the day, we ended up raising our only real investment round with 4 local insurance firms in the Columbus, Ohio area. It was interesting because they weren't normally in the venture capital business, but there was this one little window of opportunity where they decided that they would give it a try. Interesting story on this one. The insurance companies, a couple of them were sizable. One's a household name, but 2 of them were very small, really just startup local insurance companies. One of them that was an early investor in that original 4, several years after that ended up getting in trouble. A year or 2 after that, they ended up actually getting sold by a group of insurance companies. It ultimately became a company called Western and Southern, Cincinnati. And it was a couple years after that. It was about 2 years after. It was actually 18 months after Western and Southern had bought Columbus Life. We got a phone call at Checkfree, and it's an analyst from Western and Southern who says, "Hey, Checkfree? I'm Western and Southern. I've got a file in front of me from Columbus Life Files. It's from Jim Barton, and Jim's not with us anymore. We laid him off as part of our cost-cutting move, and this is his file." And I opened up his file, and his file has Checkfree stock certificates in it. It says that we own X number of shares, and we replied, yes, that's correct, our records. It says, and I looked at the Cincinnati Enquirer today, and it says that number, at this price, the Enquirer says Checkfree stocks at yesterday, but at this number of shares, it says that we own $17 million worth of Checkfree stock. We said, okay, that sounds like a correct calculation. There's silence. The guy says, we bought Columbus Life for $15 million. There's silence, and Mark says, hey, good deal. But just to be fair and to remember, Columbus Life might not have been sophisticated, but I'll let you calculate what those shares would have been if one of those 36 VC firms had actually said yes, when we ultimately sold for $4.4 billion. So what I want to do is talk to you now just a little bit about where I think the significant opportunity is, because without question, while it's certainly a down economy, I'm personally a believer that this recovery is going to be a very slow one. I even think it's going to be have more W than V direct characteristic. I think we're going to see some lumps. I do believe that we're out of the trough, and I do believe that we're going to start moving up, but it is going to be a slow ramp. But there is going to be immense amount of opportunity, and I think that central to an awful lot of that opportunity is going to be this change from the technology and delivery side to adding intelligence behind the technology. And a real central part of that, a part that is really key, is really understanding the digital consumer. And so what I have here is a room full of people who think they're pretty smart, think they're pretty up to speed, think that you've got a pretty good view on the market on today. In fact, some of you would have looked at the title of this presentation, Digital Consumer, and thought this is going to be boring because I already know all about the digital consumer. So I'm not going to ask you to do this out loud, but ask yourself this question. And ask yourself if just think in your mind, what's the answer to this question? And then just be honest with yourself. And what I also suggest is ask yourself if your head of marketing or the head of strategy at your business or the businesses you've invested in or the businesses you work with, how would they answer this question? And ask yourself if they answered it this way. So this, we believe, is a fact regarding the digital consumer. It takes a while to get your head around it, and I think of much more than most audiences, this audience is going to understand this. But in fact, this is unbelievably difficult for the financial services industry to get their head around, for, in fact, most industries to get their head around. The fact of the matter is, though, personal doesn't mean personal anymore. Personal means, look, I have learned what personal means, and what personal means is it isn't human to human. It's not person to person. Personal means me, just one person. What is personally the best, most convenient design for me? And what already the internet, what I would argue is just the first fairly simplistic generation of internet services has taught is I can get what I want, when I want, how I want it, at what screen I want, where I want, and I do not have to deal with you personally unless I want to. And I can tell you, the more you look at business opportunities, the more you think about business, the more you think about the way in which you're going to serve your consumer, you would be well served to really think about this digital consumer. And our definition, just so you know, our definition of digital consumer, this is purely an internal construct, under a research group under me, is it's households that have become dependent upon regular recurring use of digital information services as part of managing their lives. So it does not mean that because you've got a BlackBerry and you access the internet on a regular basis that you're a digital consumer. You're not a digital consumer until you are actively dependent upon online services, digital delivery to manage your life, your household services. So our overall analysis is this is about a third of what we refer to as active households. That means households that are actively engaged in the economy. And it is obviously the fastest growing segment. And it's pretty straightforward. The things that we as business leaders, business operators, business owners, the things that we have to understand as we focus on serving this rapidly escalating market is, first and foremost, to them, data is free. This is, again, in my background area, this is a very difficult concept for financial services industry to get their head around. But I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people are overlooking how important and how absolute, in my opinion, this is going to be. Consumers do believe that their data is free, and they also believe that it's theirs. So one of the things I'm constantly talking to financial service organizations about is you are hiding consumers' own data from them, and you're not going to get away with it forever, and you are going to get caught out if you aren't moving right now towards giving them access to their own information. That means 24/7, I want to know what my investment accounts are doing. 24/7, when I want, where I want to know what my 401k is doing. I'm going to argue 24/7, when I want, where I want. I want access to my DDA, and I want to be able to move money when I want, where I want, how I want. The DDA being checking account. They have been taught that data is free, that it's accessible. They know it exists. They know it's digital. They know it's in there. And if you're going to charge them for it, you better be adding a lot of value. You better not think that you're going to charge just to provide them access to the services. That means, of course, that I think that we've only seen the beginning of how pricing is going to get challenged in this. You know, these are the list of industries that have already been hit and that are getting hit. You think about telecommunications, it's just an amazing thing. You know, it was only a week or so ago that AT&T agreed to open up to Skype. When you really think about what that means, and then you match beside that net neutrality. Now, I'm on the board of Akamai, and I'm not allowed to opine on what I think about net neutrality, mostly because I have a different opinion than Akamai does, so they asked me not to opine on it. But this concept of, I mean, if you're AT&T, and I'm no big fan of giant bureaucratic organizations, that sort of thing, but I mean, let's face it, at the end of the day, these guys that laid all this fiber, and bought all of this equipment and run all this stuff, and this is billions and billions of dollars of capital infrastructure. And now they're being told, through net neutrality and through the FCC, that they're supposed to let eBay and Google ride on their pipes for free at whatever volume they want to run through it. And they are allowed to make billions of dollars in profit. And AT&T, who built all this, capital infrastructured it, and now has to run it and expand it, they're not allowed to have any opinion nor any management of how Google and eBay use their infrastructure. That is a challenge to pricing model, I can tell you. Music, obviously, everybody knows about that. Advertising television is pretty amazing. If you don't have a foot in it, it's pretty hard to understand how unbelievably torn up these two industries are in trying to figure out where in the hell they're going to go. I mean, literally, the television industry does not know where it's going to make money in the future. And they are desperately trying to figure out different models, different ways, scenario planning, trying to figure out how this is going to come out and where they can charge and how they can charge. And of course, where television goes, advertising goes. And so they're just desperately trying to figure out how they're going to stay relevant, how they're going to get paid, how accountable they're going to be, how they're going to play in this world. It's unbelievable how much pricing is changing in those areas. Automobiles, of course. Don't know how many of you know that eBay is the largest automobile dealer in the world. The number of cars that are sold online is just a stunning thing. It's something I never would have thought, that people were going to buy online. And then, of course, I just bought my last car online. It's pretty amazing how it's changed the whole used car market. It's made it a national marketplace. It's even changed the regular brick and mortar, because virtually no one, certainly no digital consumer, ever goes to a dealership anymore without having in their hand a deal from somebody else and all the inside information you need to know about what the dealer's true cost is in that car. It's fundamentally changed that pricing model. Of course, now we all agree that's a very good thing, because nobody ever enjoyed talking to a car salesman. But, I'm friends with the CEO of Progressive. It's amazing talking to him about how much the online world has changed the pricing of his insurance. The fact that that they now have those strange commercials with that strange woman where you actually create your own insurance now, and you can go to Progressive and they'll model for you what their price is, and they'll show competitors' prices, which is of course a little bit of a trick because they use a particular engine that calculates pricing a particular way. But here's the example of how fast the free data catches up. So now there are several places on the internet you can go where you can go there, and they will check the engine at the different insurance companies to tell you how it's biased, so that you'll understand the bias of the different engines that compare insurance prices. Financial services obviously is something that's getting changed dramatically. I'll talk a bit more about that. So this is sort of the number one thing that I talk to the the financial services industry about, and really this is an issue for me mostly at the C level, because overall the financial services industry, again, as I'll mention later, really does not like change, doesn't want change, and they're resistant to it. The fact is, consumers are already changing. This is absolutely happening. The example I use for them is, and this is definitely a truism, just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it isn't inevitable. There's a lot of people along the way that thought because the checkless society didn't happen, in fact, the entire banking industry did that, and let's face it, I'm here today and have the fortune to have done okay in building a business that never should have had the chance to exist. I mean, let's face it. Why in the heck was an independent company, started by one guy in a basement, able to actually dominate the electronic banking and electronic bill pay business, with the banking industry in the United States owning the entire technology infrastructure? They owned everything but the Fed. In fact, there's some question about whether they owned the Fed or not. I mean, there's no reason in the world for us to have ever gotten the opportunity to do this, except the banking industry gave up on it, didn't think it would work because it didn't happen the first 2 times they tried to do it. I can tell you that after having spent years and years and years admiring what I consider to be the greatest commercial invention in modern commerce, the invention of the credit card interchange monopoly, I can tell you for the first time, this year, I have seen the technology and the social infrastructure that is going to doom interchange. And I can tell you, standing right here, I absolutely believe that it's inevitable, and it's going to be within the next several years that you're going to see a breakdown in the interchange monopoly at the point of sale. It's going to happen because I've held in my hands and working with the technology organizations that have the ability to turn this into a perfect authentication device that can match a thumbprint on the front with a high-def screen that takes a picture of my face and does a facial recognition to thumbprint match and provides at a silicon level, not software, this is on the chip, which means you're not going to be able to hack it. It's a better authentication than any financial institution has at their primary data center in the United States. I mean, it's almost as good as it gets, and it's going to be available in the projectable future in your mobile device. Financial services is going to change, and a lot of other services, a lot of other businesses are going to change along with it. So this, again, it's from my financial services background, but this is the kind of thing that I think marketplaces need to think about. So this manifesto does not exist in this form, but our research says that consumers and the industry overall is beginning to speak these words. And as you know, on the internet, it ultimately ends up getting declared as a manifesto somewhere. But in essence, what this says is, as a digital consumer, once I become a digital consumer, a third of us are there, and the rest of us are headed towards there if we're under 60, is, look, I know that this information's all digital in your back office, and I know it's mine, and I know you have it, and it's your obligation to give me access to it 24/7 for free, or I'm heading someplace else. And the real key to this is, I know this information is mine, and everything else spins off of that. And the fact is, they're not wrong. That's a challenge. So the opportunity here is to embrace that and to use it. And this is why I think that the future is made up of such great opportunity in turning that fact, turning this flow of information into revenue and profits. Because every keystroke, every transaction that flows out of a household is a piece of information about that household, about that person. And in many cases, it's certainly the case in financial services, if you follow those keystrokes, if you capture them and you analyze them, you will have virtually, not perfect, but you will have the greatest insight into that household's financial life than anyone has ever had. Better than any personal relationship any branch manager ever had, better than any personal insight that the best investment broker had. You will know almost everything you need to know to service that household and to provide and to offer services before the household even knows that they need them. It is all about understanding that the real value going forward is going to be in taking value out of the data. It's not in delivering the data or in delivering services around the data. It's going to be about the knowledge that's inside the data. In the banking industry, we've already shown that with a moderate level of analytics applied to an online banking platform, the profitability to the financial service provider increases by 4x. And I can tell you this, we're at Fiserv very early in this process. In fact, it's a very big issue. If you think about the opportunity that Fiserv has, more data about more households, more financial information about more households than any other third party. If you really understand the power of that data, it's pretty clear to see Fiserv's got a pretty good opportunity in front of them. It's purely now an issue of what does the company really decide to do with it, and it will be interesting to see how they decide that. The digital consumer, just back into how do they think? Where are the opportunities? How do you think about thinking about them? Well, one of the things you got to separate right away is that there is no separate industry for mobile, in my opinion. And I've been an outstanding advocate in the financial services industry. Part of the reason why the bank CEOs aren't sorry to see me go is, look, give up the idea that you are going to get paid for delivering something to the mobile device. It's just a mobile PC. It's just a screen. And a consumer gets to choose what screen. And that's their choice. You're not going to get paid differently for delivering their data that they own to them where they choose. They get it when I want, where they want. And a really important part of this, and this is something that, again, I find many markets misunderstand, is they focus on beating their competitors in their marketplace. But in fact, when you deal with a consumer in a digital world, you are competing against all the experiences that consumer gets in their digital world, in their digital life. You're competing against Google and Yahoo and Amazon and the greatest, easiest to use services that a consumer experiences. It's really important to understand that. And then, what I did here is I just, as an example of the kind of expectation that gets built in consumers' minds, all I did was look and say, in the last 2 weeks, what did I do that if I think about it, would be surprising just a couple years ago to say that I'm doing this. One is I have vineyards in both California and Australia. When you actually stop and think about the fact that I can go to my vineyard site on an internet connection, and I can look at real-time data on what the weather is in my vineyard in Australia, which doesn't really mean much right now because it's winter. It means a lot about California because unfortunately we got a bunch of rain yesterday and we still have our Grenache and Mourvedre out, so that's highly problematic potentially for me. It's pretty amazing when you sit and you realize, sitting in my home in Atlanta, I can call up and I can read based on just this little pole that's sitting in the middle of different vineyards. I can see real time what's happening in the vineyards in Australia, California, sitting in my home office in Atlanta. That's actually pretty amazing. I had to stop and think about it because I take it for granted, but it's pretty amazing. It raises a pretty high expectation when somebody shows up and says, I'm now going to want to talk to you about a service that we can deliver, and here's what we want to charge for it. My expectation is it ought to be pretty good because I can do things like this. I'm actually surprised at this whole idea that the middle one sounds strange, but if you think about it, and actually I didn't. I was talking with my mom the other day, and she brought up this kid that I knew in the 3rd grade who moved away. I was thinking, gosh, I wonder whatever happened to him and where he did. He was a really bright guy. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I can actually probably find that out. It's strange. You live in the internet world like I do. I don't really think about that. Probably shows how old I am. But of course, it didn't take me that long to find him. I actually still find that pretty amazing. The guy left in 3rd grade, didn't have any idea where he was living, and it didn't take me that long to find him. But that raises an expectation to me on what I ought to be able to do if I'm working with some other firm wanting to work with them in a digital delivery medium. And research to any level. This is, again, one that surprised me. I'm a private equity firm. We're looking at a company that is a leader in laser technology. That they have the ability to build a laser that can cut through 3 to 4 inches of steel using a laser. And their big breakthrough is, as they told us, there's lots of lasers that can do that, but they all require 220. And these guys claim they figured out how to do it on 110, and the only ones that can have a high-power laser that can do that running on 110. That's a big deal because the amount of, not just the cost of electricity, but the amount of maintenance that goes into a 220 machine versus a 110 is huge. But I don't know anything about lasers. Of course, I couldn't tell them that. But thankfully, I went to CEO class along the way, and I learned how to act like I knew things I didn't know. So he didn't know I didn't know anything. And I went out and saw that there was research on this in Japan, in China, and some report in Brussels, all 3 in those languages. I think I'm hosed, and this irritatingly young analyst at our office in West Palm Beach looks up and says, I can translate that. And he goes out and picks up a tool and gets it translated. And, there's a few words here and there that you can tell, that don't really belong. But I could clearly understand the research reports. I thought that was pretty amazing. And it sets an expectation for when you show up telling me that you've got a service that you'd like to charge me for. My expectations are going to be pretty high. These are the kinds of things in terms of financial services that we are tracking, that we find consumers are already starting to question, why can't I do this? Why can't I, from the front lawn of the house I'm looking at, understand everything I need to understand about my mortgage options for this house? How it would affect me? There's no reason in the world, especially coming out of what we just came out of, that I shouldn't have a plethora of places to choose from who will give me all this information. Same thing, I'm in the store. I'm looking at the next big flat screen TV or something else, and it's expensive enough that I think, how will this affect my budget? What should I do? My financial services company, one of them, ought to be able to stand right there with me on that little screen and tell me everything I need to know about what my options are. Whether I pay cash, whether I credit, whether I use part, what the effect will be, what my payments will be. I ought to be able to tell everything that I want to know. Car, insurance, anything else that relates to it. It's all digital, it's all information, and somebody's going to win me over when they figure out that these are where my expectations are starting to move. I certainly ought to be able to understand everything that I should understand about my ability to retire and what my money is doing. I ought to be able to understand everything about the risk. If you think back at the Consumer Manifesto, this is a very, very real thing. And that is, in today's world, there's no reason that anyone should be invested in a product that they can't see end to end exactly what it is, how it works, what the risk is that it entails. And if there's any part of it that they can't see, you don't invest in it. And in fact, I'm arguing the same point at the deepest level in Wall Street. If technology can't show you that entire investment, be able to break it apart so that you can understand every step of that investment, when it's parsed, when it's repackaged, when it's resold, however, any step, if technology can't deliver that in perfect transparency, you got no business being in that investment. I ought to be able to do that at the consumer level. In fact, my personal belief is it's an obligation for the head of the household to be able to see that. Here's the flip side to it, and this is just the one area that I really, you can't talk about the opportunity without talking about the risk. And the fact is, this is a very big risk. So this is a pretty recent snapshot. I think it was just about 2 weeks ago that I had the guys just down the street take 2 snapshots for us. This and this. What these are from SecureWorks are just 2 quick. They just snapped these and handed them to us. Those are just 2 screenshots of websites where for sale, either on auction or on a bid-ask basis, are stolen credit cards, stolen PINs for online banking accounts, stolen PayPal accounts, passwords, everything having to do with access to money. These are the websites where the guys go to auction off what they've stolen. And I can tell you there are thousands and thousands and thousands of accounts for sale every day. Right now, you can go to one of these sites, you can go bid, you can get them. Wouldn't recommend it, but this is a big business. Now, I will say that as of today, in terms of the U.S., there is still a significant majority of banking fraud that takes place in paper and in manual methodology, and the number one way to have your credit card account hacked is physically. It's a waiter at a restaurant who swipes your account information. But make no mistake about it, this is a very, very big issue, and we don't have it solved yet. I do think it's going to get solved, because I do think that this device is going to provide near perfect authentication, and it's going to go a long way towards solving this, but it isn't solved yet. And so, it is fair, as I talk about this opportunity, to also remind us all, this is still the wild, wild west out there, and we need to get ahead of this. Just kind of summarize, I think this is a tremendous opportunity, but I think that the business world needs to really pay attention to where the digital consumer is today, where their expectations are, because my experience, both as a business operator on the Fiserv side and as an acquirer on the private equity side, it's my observation that mainstream business in the United States significantly underestimates the expectations that are already built and getting built up rapidly within the digital consumer, and how big and rapidly growing this digital consumer segment is. This is where a majority of profits in the retail and U.S. services environment are going to come from 5 years from now, is this digital consumer segment. They're very educated, and they are easily agitated. It's, one example of that is, I'd say the one thing I miss the most is how rapidly the mobile device has become mainstream. I think part of it's because I left my reading glasses there on the table, and those of us with reading glasses, aren't really prone to wanting to use this little screen any more than we have to. But it's also just, I just underestimated how rapidly consumers under 35 simply become comfortable with technology they've grown up with, and how much their expectation has changed. Part of our research shows that the mobile device is favored. One of the major reasons that it's favored, even in the home, is because under 35, it's a common reply when you ask, why are you doing that on your mobile device instead of your PC? The reply is, it takes too long to go to the other room and turn on my PC. That's a different world. Boy, when the time it takes to walk to the room and click on your PC is too long. But the fact is, they're so comfortable with that small device that much faster than I expected, it's just a portable computer to them. Data is there. The fact is, free data is going to change a lot of business models. It's going to change a lot of the ways in which businesses operate. The definition of personal service and personalized service is going to change a lot of things. Expectations are high. We need to be able to meet them. The thing that we need to have come together, the perfect authentication and the fact that we have to continue to manage the risk in security. That is not done. By a long shot, that is not done. There is still a lot of effort going into trying to figure out how to get into people's accounts, how to get information from you. The number one way, of course, that they get it is through social engineering. They convince you to give it to them somehow. But until perfect authentication gets here, we're going to have to figure out how to continue to manage that. And we, the service providers, are going to be responsible for doing that. It does, the digital world does accelerate our ability to reach a lot more people faster, which is a tremendous opportunity if we know how to really take advantage of it. It gives us the ability at significantly lower cost to have a much higher personalization in terms of servicing that consumer. So that's the flip side to it's a challenge to figure out how to deliver personalized service when they just flip the definition on it. But if you understand what they mean and you actually build to it, the digital world really gives us the ability at a much lower cost. We're not involving nearly as much human interaction. And in fact, if we're really reading their data, we have the ability to accurately personalize service to them as just a part of the fabric of the technology itself. That's literally what we're trying to do in an online banking platform. You don't even think about it. The platform itself has predictive analytic process built into it so that it automatically, as a part of serving the household, predicts what the household is going to want just based on the household's own information that's flowing through the system. We have, in a lot of ways, the power to build a whole new definition of trust. And I mean trust, capital T, meaning everything that means. Personalized, direct, secure, understands advisory. I'm not just going to sell you insurance. I'm going to show you why you should have a certain kind of insurance. I'm going to show you and educate using the background information, knowing what I know about your household, why you should have this level, this type, and why this is the best for you. There is a great opportunity in a lot of different areas to really take advantage of being able to personalize based on the fact that the consumer's transactions, the consumer's keystrokes, tell you what that consumer not only wants today, but what they're going to want and need in the future. You just have to listen. So, in closing, sort of I just try to think four things that I think, look back and think, what didn't the VCs tell me that I really wish they had told me? So, as opposed to what I kept reading and you sort of hear, this just isn't the case. And boy, I will tell you, nobody learned this, more directly than we did at Checkfree, because the truth is today, if at the Bankers Roundtable you had a button, that Wayback button in the middle of the table that said, press this button and we'll go all the way back to before the internet was invented and we won't have the internet, you'd have a traffic jam as all of these CEOs dove for that button. They never wanted it, and the truth is they still don't want it. They love the fact that they've got the branch system and sort of hegemony over the area protected by the Fed and federal regulation. And I don't want to pick on the banks too much. Actually, I do, but I don't want to waste your time on it. But the fact is, we had to force every incremental improvement and advancement, starting from just getting consumers access to electronic funds transfer on a single transaction basis, all the way to introducing, true online banking, true electronic payment, getting the banks to allow us to deliver bills, other people's bills electronically as a part of every step along the way. We had to force it on them, and we had to figure out a way in which to build consumer drive for it, even though we didn't sell directly to consumer, in order to bring the bank through to offer the service to the consumers that we knew they wanted and that we had built and were prepared to deliver, but the bank didn't want to deliver because it isn't true that the customer is always right. The bank is our customer, and the fact is, they weren't right a lot of the time. But the customer is always right about price. Now, this is just my experience. There's different applications in different ways, but this is definitely my experience in how we built Checkfree, and I can tell you all the way back to my wine experience. We just acquired a Pinot Chardonnay brand, and it's a brand by a very, very well-known, very high-rated winemaker. But like, in my opinion, way too many other California very high-end winemakers, he priced his Pinots and Chardonnays too high. And I bought the business because of the opportunity in this economic downturn. There will be a lot of problems in the wine industry. I acquired the business and specifically acquired it with the intent of buying it and buying vineyards at a discount in this economic climate so that I could reintroduce Pinot, a very, very high-class set of Pinots and Chardonnays at a price that I researched independently of what it cost to make the wine, buy the grapes, I found the price that I thought consumers really were willing to pay for very high-end, and I'm just in the process of reverse engineering how to get the Pinot into that price point. And that's what I've done with the vast majority of my products all along the way, and it's served me pretty well. And I found most of the time, once you know what the value proposition is the consumer wants and the price that they're interested in paying, if you find that out first, you can usually figure out how to engineer to get there. And so that, to me, is the real key. Find the value to price first, then figure out how to build to that. And if you can't build to that, maybe that's not a space you should be. So this one is pretty important. And the fact is, I think it's pretty critical. Because even in tough times, if you can find money from someone, you can find money from someone who's going to bring you more than just the money. And I can't emphasize enough. I had great fortune to ultimately have one of my early investors get bought out by 2 venture capital firms. So even though I wasn't successful in convincing them to invest with me, I did get them to invest later by buying this other guy out. They brought great value to my board. They brought great value to terms of connections and things. I definitely believe this is a very important part of understanding building a business. And then there's the final piece of advice that was given to me once as the punchline to a joke. I forget the joke. It was something about, how to make a great CEO. Of course, I was too dumb to get the joke. I thought it was serious advice. And the truth is, it's a single piece of advice that has driven me the most since I first started Checkfree. And that is to find out what I don't do well and don't do it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
On behalf of Venture Atlanta, I'd like to thank Pete for his remarks this morning and give him this gift, a token of our appreciation.
Thanks, David. Thank you. Thank you.